This is going to be the second last session on this drawing, so hopefully you've watched through the first 4 sections. So we gradually have been building this up from a simple foundation to something as complex as this, but we're going to keep pushing it further. So last week we worked on generally sort of major forms, so looking at the overall modeling, so how the form turns of the skull as a whole, kind of thinking of it almost like an egg shape. So particularly up here in the cranium and the back of the skull, you can see that sort of egginess of it. But today we're going to go in and start to try to turn those larger forms into more specific, smaller forms. So start to kind of divide these big forms into smaller forms. We'll be using the same process, so we'll be modeling things in the same way, but they'll be gradually smaller and smaller sections of the skull, so starting to get more changes of form within small sections. Before we finally next week kind of refine all of our tones. We'll do a little bit of tone refinement today as well. So we'll be refining our tones and adding detail, which will be the sort of final thing, kind of all the little notches and textures on the skull. But today we're still sort of primarily focusing on form, value structures and so on. So I'm going to begin. I just want to reinforce a bit further the depth of the shadow. I'm doing that by not working particularly hard, but working the point of my mechanical pencil into any little bits that haven't quite got covered with graphite yet. So you always get, because the paper is textured, you always have sections that are kind of the grooves of the paper, or the valleys in the grain of the paper, which don't quite get the charcoal, so they end up the graphite skims over the top. And what that means is the tone doesn't sort of go all the way through. One way to make things darker is to press really hard and flatten out the paper with the graphite. The problem with that is that you then end up with a very glossy surface, a shiny surface, because it's super smooth. And generally that's, I would say, not preferable. You want to kind of try to keep your graphite as matte as possible, so not too reflective. And to get a dark tone that's matte, you have to retain the grain of the paper, so that texture of the paper, but still cover all of the paper with graphite. And you do that by working the pencil into the little valleys. Working with a mechanical pencil, you'll find that the pencil stays sharper if you constantly sort of spiral it in your hands. So when you sort of blunt one edge of it, spin it around and use the pointed edge on the other side, because you're always basically blunting and sharpening as you go. So you blunt the edge you're working with, and then that sharpens the edge on the opposite side. And in that way you can always keep your pencil pretty sharp, which is ideal. So I'm just extending the edge of this shadow a bit, the penumbra edge of the shadow. So that's a bit better. It's not going to go enormously darker than that, so I'll probably leave it roughly there. These sections in here I've already got pretty dark. Just going to do a few skims over these shadows as well, just want to darken them a little bit more before working on these smaller forms. Yeah, it's not too bad for these darker shadows then. Go a tiny bit darker. These ones as well. I'm going to be working on the medium forms that turn out of these sections, so just want to make sure I push them to a level I'm happy with. So ready to start working on these forms now, and I'm going to start sort of primarily at the back here again and work my way forwards. So we've got some of them are already starting to be quite defined. We've got this little form here, there's a light shape and a dark shape there. And just sort of reinforce the dark shape, but then start to add some slightly softer transitions coming out of the shadows next to it. Got some other slightly smaller shadows which we want to get in at this point. The smaller shadows link to smaller forms, so as we work with smaller forms we might want to just kind of flesh out some of the shadows as well. So at this point you might need to go in with your start to go in with your kneadable eraser just to lighten off anywhere that's gone a little bit too dark. Often when you're doing those kind of large passes like we did, particularly in the last session over a vast section, you'll kind of naturally start to take out or start to add tone places where you don't quite want to add a lot of tone. That's what the eraser's for, so it just helps us regulate what we're doing a bit more. Give a little bit of variety within this plane. It sort of matches that squiggly line over the top. And then up here we've also got a few other little smaller forms sort of wrapping out of the back of the skull. Kind of breaking up the larger one there. There are some textures there as well. I'm not going to quite get into that today. Just focus primarily on these. Medium-sized forms rather than any kind of rippling textures or anything like that that run through the skull. Then as we sort of slide around, we've got these, got a lot of nice small forms above the brow. on the forehead. What would be the forehead of the skull? So go a little bit more specific with them. Again, I can go back in and just any forms that need some sort of lightening through them, certain areas, sort of just top edge of this, could do with it. Just use my eraser to take out a little bit of it. Then go back in and even things out with the pencil. And then again, taking out those highlights helps that section there, so we can kind of drop down a little bit, work down through these interconnecting small forms. They were actually quite well fleshed out last week, so we don't have to do too much on them. We'll revisit them next time when we're working on texture. So I've alternated it back to the eraser now. Just again take out some of those highlights. Just going to round out these teeth a bit as well, where they were kind of blocked in. We're nearly there with this kind of medium form work. And we'll be working on finalizing all the tiny forms and textures next time. A little bit more we can do down here. Some of these, they're quite small, these forms though, so we can leave them. yeah, so we'll leave it at that for today. But it's pretty close to being there. And certainly in a good position to get everything finalised next week. So that's it for today. As always, you can subscribe to the channel for more videos like this from myself and other teachers from OCAD. And if you click the link through, you can sign up to OCAD Studio, where you'll get tuition from myself and other specialised tutors. But yeah, that's it. I'll see you guys soon.